Okay, so I just want to kind of say a book I'm using. I want to just kind of I want to do a couple videos which are hitting on some concepts in epistemology. And the book that I've checked this out from the library. It's pretty big. This is the Real Edge Companion to Epistemology. I think this one's pretty recent. Pretty recent. This one is. Yeah, 2011. But this one's definitely a new book. But there's like a ton of things in here, and I wish I owned it. Hopefully, I can own it at some point and purchase it somewhere. So I guess I've been reading a few things out of it. There's just like a couple things I want to like touch on for my channel here. One of them is in this video is going to be talking about epistemic normativity, one about epistemic evidentialism, and one about the defeasibility theory. And if you have this, what I would direct you to reading is Epistemic Norms by Pascal Engel, which is in part 1. You know, I've definitely read some other things about normativity from people like William Alston and Alvin Goldman, and you know, lots of other epistemologists. So, what is a epistemic norm? We have normative judgments about beliefs, and what a normative judgment is it justified or unjustified? Is it good or bad? Or is it rational or irrational? Responsible to believe it or irresponsible to believe it? We're talking about epistemic normativity. When we're talking about as whether it's justified, rational, irrational, responsible, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about epistemic normativity. And Engel kind of breaks this down into two kinds of epistemic normativity. One is deontic normativity, which is we're talking about rights and wrongs and oughts, and we're not there's no comparative thing here. I personally would prefer the other one, teleological normativity, because I do believe that the justification of a belief can come in degrees. There's not just I think that it should be able to come in degrees. So deontic normativity, we're talking about oughts, and that can call for actions or sanctions. Teleological normativity, we're talking about good, bad, valuable, virtuous, defeated, and that's comparative, and we're dealing with praise and blame as to whether you're believing something that you should or not. Normative regulation. Now, how are we going to regulate our beliefs? And we're trying to regulate the beliefs by marking them, or like marking or saying things about the status of beliefs that way. Normative statements govern or guide actions to their subject, to it. So, what regulation does an epistemic norm imply? I think that every kind of any sort of theory of knowledge should have some kind of idea of what a epistemic norm is, and how that regulates beliefs and how that confers status of beliefs. A normative objectivity, that is, on epistemic norm, is it a universal principle, or does it depend on human decisions? So, if sometimes is there some kind of universal principle that governs and guides certain beliefs in the status of those beliefs, or does it depend on human decision and that depend on the theory of knowledge, and that we're talking about in question, and the human decision as to whether as to what the principle is. And we kind of get into the idea of meta epistemology, we're evaluating norms. We're doing a lot of things in meta epistemology, and we're pretty much in there. We're kind of talking about as to whether certain norms are good to use to regulate beliefs and the justification of those beliefs or not. Normative naturalization. Do norms supervene on natural facts, or can norms be reduced to natural facts? Now, this kind of thing can kind of also be looked at in the these kind of questions are also occurring in the realm of ethics, the realm of ethics as to do we have a universal principle of what the good is, or are ethical facts natural or not? But that's kind of like, and I think personally that norms on epistemic norm cannot be reduced to any kind of natural fact. That's my personal opinion. There's two epistemic norms of rationality, and these are kind of deontic. One, not believe P and not P. You can't believe something, and you cannot believe P while also believing the contradiction of that. Two, one ought to believe that Q if one believes that P and that P entails Q. And we're kind of looking at these two, well, Engel is asking what is the nature of this ought, what is meant by ought when we say that. There's just like a lot of questions here as to the norms and values that we use to regulate beliefs, the beliefs that we hold or don't hold. Ought is a constraint on rational belief. You ought not believe something based upon certain constraints or values that you make epistemic norms. Can one and two be the things I said before be valued? Can one ought not believe P and not P, and one ought to believe that P, or one ought to believe that Q if one believes that P and that P entails Q? Can those two things be violated? If they cannot be violated, then there's no real they aren't norms. They cannot be norms that can be used to regulate. But are contradictory beliefs possible? Yeah, people do sometimes obtain contradictory beliefs. And they are possible, and one can be irrational. Man can be irrational himself. So those two things can be violated. Therefore, they can be norms that can be used to regulate. So, what are the possession conditions for belief? S believes that P if and only if that the proposition that P is true. S conjectures correctly that P if and only if it is probable that P. So you have conditions as to for how you can possess a belief. You can't possess a belief that P if it is clearly not correct that P. And some of these things are conditions of epistemic permissibility. Epistemic norms and internalism. Internalism is the theory of knowledge, that we get justification by either by mental states, mentalism, or by having cognitive access to the justification of our beliefs. There's accessibilism versus mentalism there. So I guess I wanted to kind of look through some of these things that Engel brings up in that article, because these are good questions that we have to ask. Questions about norms, questions about epistemic normativity, and how norms can be enforced to regulate, and what is the nature of those norms, and stuff like that. Because that's big questions that we should probably look at if we're going to try to argue in any kind of theory of knowledge as to how the norms that we're creating can regulate, and as to whether they can be violated, um, and as to how well such norms can regulate.